The night before my wedding, my father looked me in the eye and said, "Not a single person will come to your wedding." I thought it was just his cruelty speaking, but the next day proved him right. As the church bells rang, I walked down the aisle in a white dress that suddenly felt too heavy, my bouquet trembling in my hands. 10 seats in the front row tied with perfect white ribbons stood empty, reserved for a family that chose not to be there. Guests whispered, "Where is her family?" And my heart pounded with shame. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. A new post. My parents and my sister were in Palm Springs, smiling by the pool with cocktails in their hands while I stood alone at the altar. My name is Madeline Adams, and in that moment I realized the cruelest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those you thought would love you the most. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. I was 28, standing in a white dress that felt suddenly too heavy on my shoulders, my hands trembling as I tried to hold the bouquet steady. San Diego's late afternoon sun poured through the stained glass windows, casting golden streaks across the pews filled with guests. But the front row, the row meant for my family, sat empty. 10 seats in perfect order, draped with white ribbons, completely bare. As the organ played, my heels clicked against the polished aisle floor, each step louder than the music. My heart pounded, not from nerves about marriage, but from humiliation pressing down on me like a stone. Whispers began rippling through the crowd. "Where are her parents? Isn't anyone from her family here?" I could hear them sharp and cutting, no matter how much I tried to focus forward. Michael stood at the altar, his eyes soft and steady on me, but even his smile couldn't erase the sting. I caught sight of Pastor Williams shifting uncomfortably, his gaze flickering toward the empty row before settling back on me. The tension clung to the air. I remembered the night before my father Richard's face, hard as stone when he spoke those words. He hadn't shouted, hadn't argued, just declared it flatly, as though my wedding were an inconvenience, as though I weren't his daughter about to begin a new life. My mother, Elaine, stood behind him, silent, arms folded. Vanessa, my younger sister, was scrolling on her phone, smirking as though the whole matter didn't concern her. Now, walking alone through the sea of eyes, I could still feel the weight of that rejection. The flowers arranged along the aisle smelled sweet, almost cloying, but all I could taste was bitterness rising in my throat. My fingers clutched the bouquet, tighter, petals bruising under the pressure. Halfway down, I caught the eye of one of Michael's college friends. He smiled warmly, mouthing, "You look beautiful." I forced a nod, but inside I was collapsing. The space where my parents should have been clapping, smiling, proud, it yawned like a wound. The choir's voices swelled, but my ears buzzed with the echo of those empty seats. I could see every detail, the white ribbon bows, the programs neatly stacked on the pew, the reserved signs that meant nothing now. Guests a few rows back leaned to whisper behind their hands. I lowered my gaze, trying to block it out, but the shame clung to me. As I reached the final stretch of the aisle, my steps faltered for just a second. Michael's expression tightened with worry, his hand reaching slightly forward, almost as if to catch me. I straightened my back, willing my face into a smile. The cameras clicked, capturing a moment that would look perfect in photos, but inside it was hollow. I took the last steps toward him. The altar loomed closer, the polished wood gleaming under the lights. My chest ached, my breath shallow beneath the lace bodice. When I finally reached Michael's side, I turned to face the crowd. 100 faces stared back, dressed in their best clothes, waiting for a celebration. None of them bore my father's strong jawline, none had my mother's eyes, none carried the same blood. Pastor Williams cleared his throat, beginning the ceremony. His voice was steady, but I saw the flicker in his eyes as they passed once more to the vacant row. He tried to cover it with a smile, but I felt exposed like a child standing alone on stage with no one to clap for her. Michael slid his hand into mine, squeezing gently. "You're not alone," he whispered so low only I could hear. His words steadied me, but a tear still slipped free, burning hot against my cheek. I tilted my head just slightly, as if adjusting my veil, hoping no one would notice. The vows began, each phrase about love and unity sounding almost ironic against the backdrop of absence. My voice wavered when I spoke, but I forced the words out, clinging to Michael's eyes, trying to drown in their sincerity. I could feel the guests leaning forward, sensing the tremor in my tone, but they smiled politely, pretending nothing was wrong. When it came time to exchange rings, my hands shook so badly Michael had to guide the band onto my finger. The crowd laughed lightly, assuming it was nerves, but he knew better. He lifted my hand to his lips, kissed it softly, and for a moment the world steadied. As the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, applause erupted. I smiled. I kissed Michael. I posed for the cameras. But even as the sound of clapping filled the church, my ears strained toward the silence of that front row. The emptiness roared louder than the applause. We turned to walk back down the aisle together. Guests rose, showering us with petals, cheering. My gown brushed the floor. My veil floated behind me. I kept my chin high, but my heart was heavy. At the very front, the 10 empty chairs waited, ribbons fluttering lightly in the air conditioning, untouched, unseen by the people they had been reserved for. I told myself not to look, but my eyes betrayed me. One last glance at those vacant seats, at the glaring reminder that my family had chosen somewhere else, someone else, over me. The ache settled deep in my chest as I stepped past them. Michael's hand firm around mine. We pushed open the heavy doors, stepping into the California sunlight. The warmth hit my face, but inside I was frozen. The cameras clicked, guests followed behind us in laughter and chatter, but all I could hear was my father's voice, as sharp and final as it had been the night before. "Not a single person will come to your wedding." And he had been right. I was 21 when the letter from UCLA arrived, thick, with the official seal pressed into the corner. I tore it open at my small desk in our family's house, my heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. "Congratulations," it read. "A full scholarship. My entire tuition covered. Years of late nights, studying summers, working extra shifts, all of it had paid off." I remember clutching the paper like it was gold, running to the kitchen where my father sat reading the newspaper. "Dad," I said breathlessly, "I got the scholarship. All 4 years covered." He lowered the paper, glanced at the letter, and nodded once. "Good. That's less money for us to pay." Then he went back to his crossword puzzle. No hug, no smile, no celebration. Just relief that I wouldn't cost him anything. I stood there, the letter crinkling in my shaking hands, my excitement collapsing into silence. The next year, when Vanessa won a local teen modeling contest at a mall event, the house transformed overnight. My mother strung fairy lights in the backyard. Neighbors were invited, trays of cupcakes and bottles of wine lined the counter. Laughter spilled out of every corner while Vanessa twirled in her sash and tiara, soaking in the applause. I stayed in the kitchen most of the evening, scrubbing dishes as my classmates posted congratulatory selfies with her online. My fingers wrinkled in soapy water, my chest hollow with the realization that my triumphs never merited even a dinner, while Vanessa's smallest victories deserved parties. I can still picture my 16th birthday, years before that scholarship. My parents handed me a plastic-wrapped notebook, its cover bent at the corner, a clearance sticker still stuck on the back. "You like writing, right? Use this," my mother said casually, already glancing at her phone. I forced a smile, whispered thank you, and tried not to notice how quickly they moved on to other conversations. 2 years later, when Vanessa turned 18, the living room overflowed with balloons, friends crammed shoulder to shoulder, music blasting. My father walked in with a shiny Apple bag, pulling out the newest iPhone with a bow tied around the box. Vanessa squealed, throwing her arms around him as guests clapped. I stood near the wall, my paper plate sagging under a slice of cake, watching the candles flicker on her 3-tiered masterpiece of a birthday cake. No one noticed me slip out early, the sound of cheers echoing behind me. The summer of 2019 sealed what I already knew. I was at a camp in Big Bear climbing the rock wall when my foot slipped. I landed hard, pain shooting up my arm. The counselors rushed me to the med tent, my elbow swelling fast, the skin turning an angry purple. When my mother finally arrived, I expected panic worry, at least a flicker of concern. Instead, she sighed. "You're stronger than this, Maddie. Don't make a fuss." Then she turned away to chat with another parent about vacation rentals. I sat alone on the bench clutching my throbbing arm until a counselor finally insisted on taking me to urgent care. A year later, in 2020, Vanessa tripped in the park and scraped her knee. Barely more than a scratch. My mother shrieked like she'd been shot, scooped her up, and sped to the ER. Vanessa was treated with chocolate ice cream afterward, my mother stroking her hair and whispering, "My poor baby." I watched from the doorway, my own scarred elbow hidden under my sleeve, wondering what it would take for my pain to matter. These weren't isolated moments. They were a pattern stitched into the fabric of my childhood, each thread pulled tighter until there was no space left for me. I became the reliable one, the strong one, the shadow who never asked for more. My worth was measured by how little I cost, how much I could endure, how quietly I could fade behind Vanessa's spotlight. By the time I stood in that church years later, facing those empty seats on my wedding day, I already knew. The signs had always been there. The scholarship brushed aside the birthdays, ignored the broken bone, dismissed the endless parties thrown for her. The absence of my family at the altar wasn't sudden betrayal. It was the inevitable conclusion. It was the final drop that spilled the glass already brimming over. The reception hall glowed with string lights, soft music filling the air as servers floated past with trays of champagne. Michael and I posed in front of the floral arch, smiles plastered on our faces as cameras flashed. His friends clapped him on the back, our colleagues toasted to our future, and I tried with every ounce of strength to hold myself together. I tilted my head just so, angling toward Michael, my cheeks aching from the forced grin. But every time the photographer's lens swept across the room, it caught the glaring emptiness of the front row. A guest leaned close to another, their voices low but not low enough. "Where's her family? Not even her parents." The words sliced through me sharper than the pins holding my veil. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my glass, pretending not to hear. Michael, sensing the shift in me, leaned down and whispered, "I'm here. Don't forget that." His eyes were earnest, and I nodded, but the hollow space inside me only deepened. When we cut the cake, the guests cheered, laughter echoing against the high ceiling. Michael smeared a bit of frosting on my nose, and the room erupted. I laughed on cue, tilting my head back for the camera, but as the crowd roared, I slipped my phone from my bouquet and checked the screen. A notification glowed Instagram. My heart sank before I even opened it. There it was. Vanessa lounging by a pool in Palm Springs, her designer sunglasses perched on her head, a cocktail balanced in her manicured hand. My father, Richard, sat on a deck chair beside her, grinning with a beer in hand, while my mother, Elaine, leaned against the railing, snapping the photo. The caption read in cheerful script, "Family trip with my sister." My stomach twisted, my throat closed as if I'd swallowed glass. I zoomed in on the image, searching for anything that would soften the blow. But all I saw was joy, laughter, relaxation. The family I had dreamed would sit proudly in those 10 empty seats was sunbathing miles away, raising glasses in celebration. Not of me, but of her. The irony struck hard. There I was, standing in a white gown, my name freshly changed on the marriage license, and yet I felt invisible. I glanced around the hall. People clinking glasses, coworkers from Michael's tech company taking selfies with us. They saw a perfect evening. Only I knew the truth: my family had chosen Palm Springs over my wedding. Michael noticed the way my hand trembled around my champagne flute. "What is it?" he asked softly, angling his body to shield me from the photographer. I showed him the phone. His jaw tightened, eyes darkening as he took in the photo. They actually posted it. He muttered disbelief thick in his voice. I nodded, my lips pressed so tightly together I could taste blood where I'd bitten down. Look at me, Michael said firmly, guiding my chin toward him. You don't need them. You have me. You have everyone here who actually showed up for you. His words were steady, but the rage flickering in his eyes betrayed his own hurt. He wanted to protect me, but even he couldn't erase the image now burned into my memory. As we moved through the room, greeting tables, thanking guests, the phone in my hand felt like a live wire. Every vibration, every new like on Vanessa's post sent another jolt through me. When a coworker of Michael's raised a glass and said, "Beautiful ceremony, your family must be so proud," I almost choked. Michael answered quickly, smoothly, but I caught the sympathetic flicker in the man's eyes when he noticed I didn't speak. The photographer called us back for group shots. We gathered with Michael's college friends, his coworkers, even some of our neighbors. I smiled. My arm looped through my husband's, but my phone buzzed again in my palm. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity clawed at me. As the flash went off, I tilted the screen just enough to see Vanessa had uploaded another story. This time, a boomerang of her clinking glasses with my parents captioned with 3 champagne emojis. My knees went weak. I leaned into Michael a little too heavily, forcing my smile wider as the photographer praised, "Perfect, you two are glowing." Inside, I was unraveling. I thought of the years I had fought to earn a place in their eyes, of every report card, every award, every late night of studying that had gone unnoticed. And now when I finally stood in the most important moment of my life, they had chosen a poolside toast with my sister over witnessing me walk into a new chapter. Michael whispered, "Hold on a little longer. We'll get through this night." I nodded, blinking rapidly to keep tears from smudging my makeup. The photographer lined us up again, guests cheering in the background. I lifted my bouquet plastered on the brightest smile I could muster and looked into the lens. The shutter clicked. At that exact moment, my hand trembled so violently that the phone nearly slipped from my grip. The image of my parents and Vanessa cocktails, raised, shimmered on the screen, 2 worlds colliding. Me in a white gown surrounded by strangers trying to celebrate, and them basking in sunlight, oblivious, laughing at a resort. I held my smile, but my heart shook as fiercely as my hands. The next morning, the buzzing started before the sun had even pushed through the blinds. My phone rattled against the nightstand, one message after another lighting up the screen. I reached for it, reluctantly, still groggy, hoping for even one kind word from someone who had missed the wedding. But as I scrolled, my chest tightened. The first was from my Aunt Carolyn. "Don't embarrass the family any further. Your sister is in trouble. You need to step up." The second came from Uncle Robert. "Family comes first. Maddie, don't let us down." Then another from Grandma Ruth. "Your empty row at that wedding was a disgrace. Now it's your duty to make things right. Not a single congratulations. Not a single, 'You looked beautiful.' Just demands, as if the humiliation I had endured wasn't enough, as if somehow the shame was mine to carry." My phone buzzed again this time with a voicemail notification. My stomach dropped as I pressed play. Grandma Ruth's voice, brittle but sharp, filled the room. "Madeline, the sight of those empty seats yesterday, it brought shame on all of us. The neighbors are already talking. You have to fix this. Help your sister. Do not let the family's reputation sink further." I froze, the words settling like lead in my chest. It wasn't enough that they had abandoned me on the most important day of my life. Now they were turning it into my fault, accusing me of dishonoring them, of tarnishing some fragile image of family pride. Michael stirred beside me, propping himself up on one elbow. "What is it?" His voice was groggy, but laced with concern. I handed him the phone. He listened, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. When the voicemail ended, he exhaled hard, setting the phone down on the sheets. "Unbelievable. They didn't show up, they humiliated you, and now they're blaming you, Maddie. This is manipulation, plain and simple." I buried my face in my hands, hot tears slipping through my fingers. I just wanted one day where they would stand with me, where I wasn't the afterthought. And instead, my voice cracked. Instead, I'm the villain. Michael pulled me into his chest, his hand smoothing down my hair. You are not the villain. You never have been. They've been rewriting the story for so long you've started believing it, but it isn't true. I wanted to believe him, but the chorus of messages still rang in my head. Each ding of the phone was another reminder that in their eyes, I would always be responsible. For their choices, for Vanessa's mistakes, for the family's reputation. My breath came ragged, my body trembling as though the weight of years had finally crashed down. The phone lit up again. Another message from Carolyn. If you don't help people, we'll think you've abandoned your own blood. Do you want that on your conscience? Michael snatched the phone from my hands, his jaw tight. You don't need to read this garbage. But I grabbed it back, staring at the screen through blurred vision. I couldn't stop myself. For years, every guilt-laden word had sunk hooks into me. Even now, married grown, standing in my own apartment, I felt 13 again, clutching a science trophy on a bus with no one to cheer me on. Michael sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders. Let them talk. Let them accuse. You don't owe them anything. His words were steady, but the ache inside me didn't ease. I pressed my palms against my forehead, rocking slightly, trying to steady my breathing. The walls of our new apartment felt like they were closing in, the white walls too bright, the silence too sharp between each vibration of the phone. Finally, I set it down face first on the nightstand. I can't do this right now, I whispered. My throat was raw, my chest aching. Michael kissed the top of my head. Then don't. You don't have to answer. Not today. I nodded, though the tears wouldn't stop. The weight of their words clung to me like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. I curled into Michael's arms, sobs breaking free, my body shaking. He held me, rubbing slow circles on my back, but I could feel his helplessness in the way his chest rose and fell beneath my cheek. There were no quick fixes, no magic words. Only the brutal truth that the people who were supposed to love me most had chosen to abandon me and now demanded I carry the blame. I stayed there until the morning light crept across the floor, the phone still buzzing every few minutes with new messages I couldn't bear to read. My wedding bouquet sat in a vase on the dresser, its petals already starting to wilt. I stared at it through swollen eyes, thinking how quickly beauty fades, how quickly joy withers when it isn't nurtured. For the first time, I realized that maybe my family had never intended to nurture mine at all. It was exactly a week after the wedding when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me hesitated. When I answered, a calm, professional voice introduced herself as an employee from Wells Fargo's fraud department. Mrs. Adams, she said, pronouncing my new last name carefully. We detected unusual activity from your joint wedding fund account. A transfer of $12,000 was initiated yesterday. Can you confirm if you authorized this transaction? The words hit me like a punch. I'm sorry, I stammered, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. Did you say $12,000? Yes, ma'am. $12,000. The transfer was attempted online using your login credentials. Before we clear it, we need your confirmation. My pulse roared in my ears. No, absolutely not. I didn't request that. Neither did my husband. There was a pause, the keyboard clicking faintly on her end. Thank you. That's important to note. Our system also logs the IP address where the request originated. The location registered as Los Angeles, California. Does that make sense to you? Los Angeles? My hands trembled. My parents' house was in Los Angeles. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles whitening. Yes, I whispered, though the word tasted bitter. We'll flag it as unauthorized and freeze the attempt. Do you want us to open a formal investigation? She asked. My mouth went dry. I need some time to think. Of course. I'll leave the case open and note your response. Please secure your account immediately. When I hung up, I realized my knees were weak. I set the phone on the table and sank into a chair, staring blankly at the framed wedding photo propped against the wall. Michael and I, smiling our hands, joined the golden arch of flowers behind us. For a fleeting moment, it had felt like the start of something new, something safe. And now that safety had been ripped apart, Michael walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Who was that?" My voice cracked. "The bank. Someone tried to take $12,000 from our wedding account." He froze, setting the mugs down so hard that coffee sloshed over the rim. "What, when?" "Yesterday." They stopped it before it cleared. My hands shook as I twisted the phone toward him. "The login came from Los Angeles." His jaw tightened instantly. "Your parents." I didn't answer, but the silence was loud enough. Michael's fists clenched at his sides. "That's it. We're calling the police. This isn't a misunderstanding anymore, Maddie. This is theft." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "But if we do, it means accusing my own parents. Taking legal action against them? They already crossed that line," he shot back, his voice low with fury. "They didn't just abandon you at your wedding, they're stealing from you. From us." I turned back to the photo on the wall, my reflection warped in the glass. My dress, my forced smile, the bouquet that already looked faded in memory. I thought of how long I had dreamed of that day, how many years of working double shifts and saving had gone into making it possible. And now, less than a week later, the money meant for our new life was slipping through my fingers. I pressed my palms against my eyes, fighting the hot sting of tears. I can't be the daughter who calls the cops on her own family. What if it destroys what little connection is left? Michael knelt beside me, his hands firm on my shoulders. "What connection? They didn't even show up to your wedding. They chose Palm Springs over you. And now they're emptying your account like you're nothing but an ATM. Tell me what's left to destroy." I stared at him, torn in two. He was right, but the thought of seeing my parents' names in a police report made my stomach churn. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady buzz in my ears. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the present. The coffee mug still sat untouched, steam curling upward. The wedding bouquet on the counter drooped, further petals browning at the edges. I whispered, barely audible, "Why do they keep doing this to me?" Michael pulled me into his arms, his voice gentler now. "Because you've always let them. But you don't have to anymore." I nodded against his chest, but inside I was spiraling. I wanted to believe I could draw a line, that I could finally put an end to the cycle. Yet every memory of my childhood told me otherwise. Every sacrifice I had made, every time I had stepped aside for Vanessa, every moment I had been told to be the strong one. It all pressed down on me now. I lifted my eyes again to the photo on the wall. The smiles, the flowers, the illusion of happiness. It felt like someone else's life. My own had already been invaded, my joy corrupted. The bank's words echoed in my head, Los Angeles. The IP traced straight back to them. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling, hovering over the screen. Call the police. Call my parents. Do nothing. Each choice felt like tearing something apart. Michael watched me, his voice steady but pained. "Whatever you decide, I'll back you. But don't let them keep stealing pieces of you." I stared at the phone, then at the wedding picture, then back again. My chest tightened, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might break through my ribs. The happiness I thought I'd built was already under siege, and it had only just begun. I finally pressed their number, my thumb hovering before the call connected. My chest tightened as the ringing gave way to my mother's voice. Madeline Elaine said, almost relieved, like she'd been waiting for me, "I was just about to call you. Listen, don't be dramatic about the bank. That wasn't stealing. It was helping the family. Your sister needed it." My breath caught. "Helping?" My voice shook. "You went into our wedding fund without asking me. That's not helping, that's stealing." She clicked her tongue, the sound sharp against my ear. "Don't exaggerate. Vanessa is under so much pressure right now. Her credit card has maxed the banks on her case. You know how important her reputation is." A low voice entered the line, steady and firm. "My father. You've always had money, Maddie. Scholarships, jobs, savings. You've been fine. But now the family needs you. You can handle this. You always have. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles burned. It's my money, Michael's and mine. It was supposed to start our life together, not clean up after her. Before I could breathe, Vanessa's voice rang out high and cutting. So you'd rather watch me lose everything? You don't want me to be embarrassed, do you? All it takes is one transfer. You know I'll pay you back. Something inside me snapped. My body trembled, but my voice rose louder than it ever had with them. This is my wedding money, mine and Michael's. No one has the right to touch it. Not you, not Mom, not Dad. No one. The silence that followed stretched thick and suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Michael, who had been listening quietly beside me, leaned close and spoke directly into the receiver. His voice was calm but firm. We're not giving you another dime. Not now, not ever. This stops today. For a moment, nothing. Just static. Then my mother's voice cracked like a whip. Selfish. That's what you are. After everything we've done for you, you repay us like this. You're ungrateful. I flinched at the word. Selfish. It had been hurled at me since I was a child whenever I wanted something for myself, whenever I dared to say no. But this time the word didn't sink the same way. It lit something inside me, a flame sparking where only ashes had been. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen as tears welled and spilled hot down my cheeks. Michael reached for it, but I shook my head. My hand was steady now. I'm done. I whispered more to myself than to them and pressed the button to end the call. The screen went black. The apartment filled with the hollow echo of silence broken only by my uneven breaths. My shoulders shook as the tears came harder, my body curling in on itself. Michael slid beside me on the couch, his arms wrapping around me, holding me tight. You did the right thing, he murmured, his chin resting against my hair. I pressed my face into his chest, sobbing, but underneath the sorrow was something else. A heat rising, a strength I hadn't felt before. For the first time in my life, I had shouted back. I had drawn a line. And though my tears stained Michael's shirt, I knew deep down that something in me had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. The glass doors to Lewis and Carter Law swung shut behind me, and for a moment I just stood there in the quiet lobby, clutching my folder so tightly the edges dug into my palms. The building smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the kind of sterile air that made me feel like something serious was about to happen. Michael touched my elbow gently, guiding me toward the reception desk. Madeline Cooper. I told the receptionist, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. I have an appointment with Attorney Lewis. She smiled politely, picked up the phone, and within minutes a tall man in a gray suit appeared, his expression professional, but not unkind. Mrs. Adams, he greeted, shaking my hand firmly. I'm Daniel Lewis. Please come in. We followed him into a sleek office with shelves lined in neat legal books and a wide window that framed the San Diego skyline. I lowered myself into the chair across from his desk, my fingers still gripping the folder in my lap. Why don't you tell me what's going on? He asked, folding his hands together. The words stumbled out in fragments at first, but once I started, it all came tumbling. The wedding fund. The bank call, the unauthorized attempt, the call with my parents. The accusations of being selfish. By the time I finished, my throat was raw, my chest heavy. Lewis nodded slowly. I see. First, let me make something very clear. What they did attempting to transfer funds from your account without permission is not helping. It's unauthorized access. Under California law, it can absolutely be considered a civil violation, potentially even criminal depending on intent. The word criminal made my stomach knot. He continued, I'm not saying you need to pursue charges today, but you do need to protect yourself. I recommend changing all login information. Banking, credit cards, email, everything. Set up two-factor authentication. We'll notify the bank formally to put fraud alerts on your accounts. And most importantly, we'll document everything. If this escalates, You'll want a paper trail. I swallowed, nodding. So you're saying I should treat this like they're strangers? Lewis tilted his head. I'm saying you should treat this like anyone else who's attempted to steal from you, family or not. I sat back in the chair, the words weighing on me, family or not. That line drawn so simply in his voice felt impossible in my heart. Michael leaned forward, his hand brushing mine. We'll do it, he said firmly. All of it. Lewis slid a stack of forms across the desk. Sign these authorizations so I can correspond with your bank on your behalf. It will also let me collect transaction records directly. If you decide to file a formal claim later, these documents will help. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. The tip hovered over the line, my name typed neatly beneath it. For a moment I hesitated, the thought of my mother's voice echoing in my head. Selfish. Then I exhaled and pressed the pen to paper. The ink flowed in a firm, deliberate stroke. Lewis nodded once. That's the right choice. When the meeting ended, he walked us out with a list of steps to complete by the end of the day. Change all passwords, move the remaining wedding funds into a new account with restricted access, enable fraud monitoring. The elevator ride down was silent, except for the hum of cables. I stared at the mirrored wall at the reflection of a woman whose eyes were red, but steadier than they had been in days. Michael's reflection stood beside me, his hand holding mine tightly. Once outside, the city air felt warmer, fuller, as though I'd stepped out of a cage. We crossed the street, the sounds of traffic and gulls filling the space between us. I hadn't realized until then how shallow my breathing had been. Now, for the first time in weeks, I inhaled deeply, the oxygen burning sweet in my lungs. Michael squeezed my hand. We're doing the right thing, Maddie. I knotted my throat tight, but I couldn't stop the small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. It feels like a chain's been cut, I admitted quietly. As we walked toward the parking garage, I tilted my head back, staring at the blue California sky stretching wide and endless above me. For years, I had felt tethered, bound by obligation, guilt, and silence. But with one signature, with one steady breath, I felt something shift. The ties might not be severed completely, but the lock had been broken, and for the first time I realized I had the power to walk free. The invitation arrived as a text from my mother, short and polite, as if nothing had happened. Dinner this weekend, downtown Los Angeles. The family wants to talk. For 2 days, I debated whether to go, but something in me needed to see it through, to hear what they really wanted after everything. On Saturday night, Michael and I drove up the 5, the city lights sprawling wider the closer we got to downtown. The restaurant was one of those places with glass walls and white tablecloths, the kind my parents only reserved for show. A hostess led us to a private dining room where my family was already seated. The moment I stepped in, I felt the stiffness. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, posture straight, his expression carved into something formal. My mother, Elaine, wore a smile that looked pasted on, too bright to be real. Vanessa was radiant in a silk blouse, her hair styled in loose waves, a folder the color of pale pink resting on the table in front of her. Madeline, Richard said, rising slightly before settling back into his chair. Michael. His voice was cordial but cool. Glad you could make it. Michael and I sat across from Vanessa. The waiter poured wine, menus were handed out, but no one spoke about the wedding, about the empty seats, about the calls and accusations. They asked about traffic, about the weather, about Michael's job. The small talk felt rehearsed, hollow. When the entrees arrived, Richard cleared his throat, his eyes narrowing as if preparing to deliver a speech. Actually, tonight there's more than just dinner, he began. He glanced at Vanessa, who smiled and straightened her folder. Your sister has something important to share. Vanessa opened the folder with a practiced flourish, sliding glossy pages across the table toward me. Charts, mood boards, projections, all perfectly printed. I'm launching a luxury fashion brand in Los Angeles, she announced, her voice confident. A boutique line that will target high-end clients. This is more than a business, Maddie. It's an opportunity for the family to build something lasting together. Richard nodded approvingly. Vanessa has ambition. What she needs now is support. With an investment of $75,000, you and Michael could secure 40% of ownership. Think of it, Madeline. A chance for our family to succeed together. Elaine leaned forward, her smile tight. It would heal a lot of wounds. Bring us closer. The words stung. Heal. As if throwing money at Vanessa's dream could erase years of neglect, betrayal, and theft. I picked up the packet, flipping through page after page of polished branding. Vanessa's eyes sparkled as she spoke, explaining her vision of showrooms and runway events, of partnerships with influencers and stylists. Her tone was professional, but I recognized the performance. Every line sounded memorized, every gesture calculated. When she finished, silence settled. They all looked at me, waiting. My father's gaze was firm. My mother's expectant Vanessa's filled with smug certainty. I set the papers down carefully. It looks impressive, I said evenly. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my own folder, thick with documents from Cooper Advisory, the firm I had been building in San Francisco. I slid it across the table. But here's what the numbers actually say. Richard's brow furrowed as he opened it. Elaine leaned closer, her smile faltering. Vanessa's eyes darted nervously as she caught sight of the pages. Inside were rejection letters from 3 major banks dated and signed, risk assessments noting lack of experience, insufficient collateral, unsustainable projections. I had obtained them through contacts because I had suspected this night was coming. 3 banks already turned this down. I said, my voice calm but sharp. They didn't reject it because they couldn't see the vision. They rejected it because the numbers don't add up. Because it's risky. Because it's destined to fail. Vanessa's face drained of color. You went behind my back, she hissed, her voice shaking. No, I replied, locking eyes with her. I did my homework. Something you should have done before parading this around like it was a sure thing. Richard slammed his hand lightly against the table, not loud enough to draw attention from the staff, but hard enough to rattle the glasses. Madeline, this isn't appropriate. Elaine's voice wavered. You didn't need to embarrass her like this. I leaned forward, my tone steady. You invited me here under the pretense of dinner, but this wasn't about family. This was a pitch. And you expected me to hand over $75,000 after you already took money from me without asking. You think I'd trust you again? The room went quiet, thick with tension. Vanessa's cheeks flushed red, her fingers twisting the pastel folder until the edges bent. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's eyes flicked from me to Michael, searching for some sign of weakness. Michael finally spoke, his voice low but firm. We're not interested. We have our own lives, our own plans. You can't keep treating Maddie like a bank account. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Forks rested untouched on plates. The air conditioning hummed above us, and still no one moved. Vanessa finally muttered, her voice brittle. You'll regret this. But I didn't flinch. For once, I didn't shrink under their stares. I sat tall, my hands folded calmly on the table, and let the weight of the truth hang there. The dinner plates grew cold, the wine sat untouched, and in that hollow luxury every mask began to crack. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the polished floor as every eye in the room locked on me. My voice came out steady, louder than I expected, slicing through the silence. I am not this family's wallet. You left me alone on my wedding day just like you've left me alone my entire life. And now you expect me to pour my future into a sister who stole from me. No, never again. Elaine's breath caught, and she covered her mouth with her napkin as tears spilled down her cheeks. Madeline, she cried, her voice quivering. You're tearing this family apart. Richard's palm slammed against the table, the glasses rattling. Enough. You have no respect, no gratitude. We raised you, gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. His face flushed, deep red veins bulging at his temple. Vanessa leaned forward, her tone sharp, desperate. You're ruining my chance, Maddie. You're destroying my future because you can't let go of your bitterness. Her manicured fingers clutched the bent edges of her folder knuckles, whitening. For a moment, the weight of all their voices pressed down on me, trying to shove me back into the corner I'd always occupied. But before I could falter, Michael rose from his seat beside me. He placed his hand gently on my back, his other palm flat on the table as he spoke firmly. "She's not alone anymore. If you want to yell at someone, yell at me. But stop treating her like she's nothing, because she is everything to me." The room went still. My father's glare shifted from me to Michael as though sizing him up. My mother dabbed at her eyes, shaking her head, whispering, "Selfish, selfish," like a mantra. Vanessa bit her lip, fury flashing behind her eyes, but no words coming out. I lifted my chin, staring at each of them in turn. I won't apologize for choosing myself. Not this time. Not ever again. With that, I slipped my arm through Michael's and turned toward the door. My heels clicked against the tile each step, cutting deeper into the silence. Behind us, chairs creaked, as no one dared to move, no one dared to follow. The waiter peeked into the room, sensing the tension, but quickly vanished when he caught sight of my father's expression. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the humiliation radiating from the table, could almost taste the bitterness in the air as we walked away. For once, it wasn't mine to carry. Out in the cool night, the city hummed with traffic laughter spilling from bars and restaurants. Michael held the door open for me, his hand warm against my back. The moment the air hit my face, I inhaled deeply, my chest loosening for the first time all evening. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly, searching my face as we reached the car. I let out a shaky laugh. Part relief, part disbelief. I don't know if okay is the word, but I feel lighter, like I finally said what needed to be said. He nodded, squeezing my hand. "You were incredible in there." We slid into the car, the city lights blurring past as Michael drove. I stared out the window, my reflection faint against the glass. The woman staring back at me didn't look like the quiet, obedient daughter anymore. She looked like someone who had finally stepped out of the shadows. When we reached our apartment in San Diego, I kicked off my heels by the door and collapsed onto the couch. My body trembled, adrenaline still surging, but beneath it all was a strange calm. I thought of their faces. Vanessa's flushed with shame, Richard's hard with anger, Elaine's streaked with tears. For once I hadn't bowed, hadn't absorbed their rage in silence. I had given it back. Michael sat beside me, pulling me close. Whatever happens next, we face it together. I rested my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes. The night had drained me, but it had also freed me. Somewhere deep inside, a fire that had been smoldering for years had finally caught flame. The silence of the apartment was comforting, the opposite of that suffocating dining room. I could still hear the echoes of my mother's cries, my father's pounding fist, my sister's accusations, but they no longer bound me. I exhaled slowly, the sound filling the room. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from them. I felt like I was walking toward something new, something I could finally call my own. It was early on a Monday when Michael slid the folded newspaper across the breakfast table toward me. "You're going to want to see this," he said quietly. The bold headline of the Los Angeles Times nearly knocked the breath from my chest. "Vanessa Cooper's fashion brand collapses, investors pull out." I unfolded the pages with trembling fingers. The article was brutal. It detailed how the brand had failed to secure sustained funding, how projected numbers were inflated, how every backer had walked away within weeks. A single sentence seared itself into me. Industry insiders cite lack of experience and mismanagement as the primary causes of failure. For a long moment, I just stared at the words, the bitter irony sinking in. She had stood in front of me with her glossy folder, pitching herself like the next great designer, while behind the curtain, it had already begun to crumble. By the end of that week, whispers spread quickly. Michael forwarded me emails from colleagues who'd overheard conversations in meetings. Vanessa Cooper's project is radioactive. Nobody will touch her again. Social media piled on with ruthless memes mocking her, branding her arrogance. Friends who once tagged themselves at her parties now made jokes at her expense. I wanted to feel triumphant, but the emotion that surfaced was quieter. A strange mixture of sadness and release. It wasn't joy I felt watching her fall. It was relief that the burden of carrying her mistakes was no longer mine. But then the phone calls started again. First from my mother. Her voice cracked through the line, high and desperate. "Madeline, your sister is drowning. The banks are calling, the creditors won't stop. Your father and I had to mortgage the house just to cover part of the loans. Do you hear me? We mortgaged the house." I sat in my office chair at our San Francisco apartment, my gaze fixed on the window where fog curled around the Bay Bridge. "I hear you," I said flatly. Her tone shifted, sharp, accusing. "This is your fault. If you had stood with her, if you had helped, none of this would have happened. You've destroyed this family." Something in me stilled. The years of swallowing their words, of letting them define me, of letting their blame seep into my bones, they no longer landed the same way. I lifted the phone closer and spoke with a calm I didn't know I had. "No, Mom, I didn't destroy anything. You and Dad did long ago when you decided one daughter mattered more than the other." There was silence on the other end. A shaky breath, then a sudden click as the call disconnected. A few hours later, my father's number lit up my screen. I almost ignored it, but curiosity made me swipe. His voice was harsh, tired, a mixture of anger and defeat. "Madeline, you've gone too far. Your coldness, your stubbornness, you've cost us everything. Do you understand? We're losing the house. We're losing our name." I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. The weight of his words should have crushed me, but instead they floated past. "You lost those things on your own," I replied evenly. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." He growled low into the receiver, then hung up without another word. The apartment was quiet after that, only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint cries of gulls outside. I set the phone on the desk and turned toward the window. The city stretched before me, alive and indifferent. The bay shimmered under a patch of late sunlight breaking through the fog. I rested my chin in my hand, exhaling slowly. For years I had carried the crushing guilt of not being enough, of somehow being responsible for the cracks in our family. But in that moment, staring out at the water, I felt it lift. The guilt wasn't mine. It had never been. I reached for the wedding photo that now hung properly framed on the wall above my desk. I studied the smile on my face, Michael's hand gripping mine. It wasn't perfect happiness captured there. It was defiance, resilience, a promise to myself. The phone lay silent beside me. For once, I didn't dread the next call, the next accusation. The silence itself felt like freedom. And as the sun dipped lower behind the city, painting the sky in streaks of gold and violet, I let the quiet sink in unburdened light in a way I had never known before. The view from our new apartment still startled me sometimes. From the 30th floor, San Francisco stretched wide and glittering the bay, a sheet of shifting silver beneath the morning sun. Michael and I had saved for months, and finally this was ours. A space that felt untouched by the past, where every piece of furniture, every photo frame belonged to the life we were building together. Most mornings started the same. I brewed coffee while Michael read through his emails at the kitchen counter, sunlight pouring across his face. He'd look up, grin, and say, "Big day," and I'd laugh already, mentally preparing for another round of client calls. Cooper Advisory. The small firm I had started almost quietly was beginning to grow in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. At first it was one or two small contracts companies hesitant but willing to let me prove myself. I poured everything into them. Long nights combing through data, endless revisions on reports, hours practicing presentations. When one of those clients sent me a thank you note saying my plan had saved their business from a major loss, I pinned it to my office board. It was proof that my work mattered. Word spread. Soon, larger clients came calling. Startups on the edge of expansion, family businesses desperate for stability. Each one was a new test, and I met them head on. I no longer heard my father's voice dismissing my achievements. I no longer pictured Vanessa basking in applause while I was ignored. This was different. These people trusted me. Michael was there for every late night. He brought me tea when my eyes blurred from staring at spreadsheets, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders when I forgot the time. We argued sometimes about how much I was working, about leaving dishes in the sink. But even those arguments felt like something real, something grounded. He wasn't tearing me down. He was standing beside me, reminding me I didn't have to do it all alone. Outside of work, I forced myself to try new things. A yoga studio down the block became my sanctuary. At first, I stumbled through the poses, embarrassed by how stiff I was. But the instructor, a woman named Alana, always smiled and said, "Breathe. That's all that matters." Slowly, my body loosened. My breaths deepened, and for the first time in years, I felt connected to myself again. Then there was Derek, a fellow consultant I met through a networking event. He was sharp, funny in a dry way, and quick to offer advice without making me feel small. Over coffee one afternoon, he leaned across the table and said, "You know, you don't have to downplay how good you are at this. Own it. People notice." Karen, my old mentor from San Diego, became a lifeline too. She introduced me to circles I never thought I'd be part of. Industry events panels, rooms filled with people who spoke the language of finance with confidence. At one of those gatherings, standing beneath crystal chandeliers in a downtown hotel ballroom, Karen introduced me to a group of executives and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is Madeline Adams, one of the most brilliant financial advisors I've ever worked with." The words stopped me cold. For a second, I forgot how to smile, how to breathe. All my life, I had begged for even the smallest acknowledgement, a nod, a well done. And here it was, out in the open, said without hesitation, without conditions. I felt the burn of tears behind my eyes, but swallowed them back, letting a radiant smile spread instead. I shook hands, I listened. I spoke when spoken to, but inside I was still holding on to Karen's words like a lifeline. One of the most brilliant. That night, back in our apartment, Michael found me standing by the window, staring out at the bay with a glass of wine untouched in my hand. "You're awfully quiet," he said, coming to stand beside me. "Karen called me brilliant today," I whispered, almost afraid saying it out loud would make it vanish. Michael chuckled softly, wrapping his arm around my waist. "She just said what I already knew." The city glowed beneath us, headlights weaving across the bridge, the fog rolling in like a slow tide. I leaned into Michael, letting his warmth steady me. For the first time, I wasn't defined by what my family had taken, by the hollow spaces they'd left. I was defined by the work I did, the people who saw me, the life I was shaping with my own hands. As I set the wine glass down and turned into Michael's arms, a smile tugged at my lips, not forced, not brittle. It was real, born from something deeper than relief. It was the quiet, steady joy of finally being seen. The night of the gathering, the apartment glowed in a way it never had before. Candles flickered along the counters, the scent of roasted vegetables and garlic bread drifted from the kitchen, and soft jazz hummed in the background. Michael had spent the afternoon helping me string lights along the balcony, their reflections dancing against the glass windows that framed the bay. By the time the first guests arrived, the space felt alive, pulsing with warmth. Derek came in first, balancing a bottle of Cabernet and a bag of homemade cookies. "Housewarming, right?" he said with a grin. "Figured I'd bring dessert." Karen followed soon after with her husband, carrying a basket filled with cheeses from a shop in North Beach. One by one, friends and colleagues filled the apartment, coats draped over chairs, voices layering over one another until the whole place buzzed with laughter. I moved through the rooms, topping off glasses, hugging shoulders, laughing at jokes. At one point, I stopped by the kitchen island watching as Derek explained some ridiculous story to a circle of people who were doubled over in laughter. Karen, perched near the window, was deep in conversation with Michael about a new hiking trail they both wanted to try. The sight rooted me where I stood. For so long, gatherings like this had been painful reminders of what I lacked. Family dinners where I sat in silence while Vanessa was praised, birthdays where my gifts felt like afterthoughts, holidays where my efforts went unnoticed. But here in this apartment, surrounded by people who chose to be here, I felt something else entirely. I lifted my glass just to myself and whispered under my breath, "This is what family feels like." Later in the evening, Karen called for everyone's attention. To our host, she said, raising her glass high for building not only a beautiful home but also a beautiful life. To Madeline. The group echoed her words, glasses clinking, voices warm. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks as I smiled, blinking against the sting of tears. "Thank you," I said softly, though I knew my voice was barely audible over the cheer. Inside, though, the words echoed loudly, "Thank you for seeing me." When the plates were cleared and the laughter softened into smaller conversations, I slipped out to the balcony for a breath of fresh air. The city stretched before me, lights shimmering across the water. Michael joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "They love you," he said simply. I let the truth of that sink in. They weren't bound to me by blood but by choice. They came because they wanted to, not because they were obligated. No comparisons, no dismissals, no strings attached, just acceptance. I thought about the empty seats at my wedding, the accusations that had followed, the endless demands. And I thought about this night, this room full of people who brought joy instead of judgment. The contrast was so stark it almost made me laugh. I whispered into the night, I lost one family, but I found another. Michael kissed my temple, and for a moment the silence between us said everything. Back inside, the party began to wind down. Coats were pulled from the backs of chairs, goodbyes exchanged with lingering hugs. Derek promised to text me about a new project idea. Karen squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you." When the door finally closed behind the last guest, I leaned against it for a moment, the quiet of the apartment wrapping around me like a blanket. Michael began stacking glasses in the sink, humming to himself. I walked to the center of the living room and looked around at the remnants of the evening. The half-empty wine bottles, the crumbs of bread on plates, the faint scent of candles still lingering. And then I looked at the framed diploma on the wall, hung in the exact center where it caught the glow of the lights. For years, it had felt like a hollow victory, a reminder of what my family had never acknowledged. Now it was something else entirely, a symbol not of what I lacked, but of what I had built, on my own. I smiled, my chest full in a way I hadn't thought possible. Voiceover. I once believed my worth depended on the people who ignored me. I once begged for recognition that never came. But I was wrong. I lost a family bound by blood, but I found a family bound by love, trust, and choice. My value has never been in those who abandoned me. It has always been in the ones who truly saw me. I turned off the lights, the city outside still glowing alive. My heart felt lighter than it ever had. And before the story could fade into silence, I leave you with this. Have you ever been abandoned by your family on the most important day of your life? Share your story. I want to hear it.